Hey, what's going on, everybody? First off, disclaimer, I haven't done a whole lot of these YouTube videos, but I just recently purchased a set of the rough country running boards for my Jeep JL. We plan on putting some bigger tires on it, a little lift, and trying to make it easier for my wife to get in and out of the thing. And I looked at all of them. I looked at the amp research and rough country, and there's a few others, but ended up and decided to go with the rough country steps simply because our Jeep had the rock sliders on it from factory, and I liked the looks of that. But I wanted the functionality of the retractable running boards, and the rough country running boards give that appearance. But during the installation, and let me say this first off, this is not an install video by any means, but it's more of a tips for while you're installing that the other videos on YouTube don't really talk about a lot. And there's some good videos, especially the ones from rough country themselves. They make a really good installation video, but the video is what, 10-15 minutes long, and I can guarantee you, first off, that this is not a quick job. This is probably 5 to 6 hours is what it took me start to finish, I would imagine. Involves a whole lot of rolling around on the ground on your back. I don't have a lift in my garage here, but involves a lot of time on your back on the concrete or on a creeper. You may lift the vehicle up a little bit, put it on some ramps. That would probably help quite a bit too, which I didn't do that because I thought I had plenty of clearance underneath it to roll around. But I made some notes so that I wouldn't forget to pass on to you what I wanted to get across. Again, it's not an install video. It's not an unboxing video. There's plenty of those out there, and from the looks of it, this is a really good product. I like it. It looks good. It functions well. I will say this, that it's not as quiet as the amp steps are on my F250, and I'll show you that here shortly. But just be prepared. As I was going through the install manual, there's quite a few things in there that I questioned and that weren't really covered in the other install videos that are on YouTube. But first of all, let me show you what I've got. I've got a 21. It's a Jeep JL, the Ultimate Rubicon. And as you can see, the running boards are installed on it already. I finished this up yesterday, and we've been playing with them quite a bit here lately. But you know, one thing that it doesn't talk about a lot, and you can't find much on, is the gap between the running board and the pinch weld. And as you can see, as I'm approaching the door, you can see through that gap. And here's a better look at how much gap you'll have. And the factory rock sliders have a slight bow to them, which match the contour of the body. But on these, they're a straight piece of aluminum, and they don't have a bow, so you have more of a stick out at the front. See if you can get a picture of that. Yeah, you have more of a stick out at the front as opposed to the center, and then you have more stick out at the back. Now the kit comes with a set of shims in it, and it doesn't show those on the install manual. They look kind of like a horseshoe, and I'll show you a little picture I drew of those here in a minute. But those are used to draw the running boards in closer to the pinch weld to give you a little bit tighter of a gap. Now from the side, they look really sharp. You can't really see any gap from the side like this. It's just as you walk up to it, approach it, that's when you'll see the little bit of a gap on it. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that these running boards are a little bit noisy, and this is what I'm talking about. Let me open the door. You can hear the clunk So you can hear the motors operate. You can hear the clunk. But everything's good and tight. It's just part of the mechanism that gives it that sound. Let me go back over here to the workbench so I can pick up where I wanted to talk about. So time to install, like I said, is about 6 hours, and it's a good long 6 hours. So be sure you set aside plenty of time to accomplish that. Now let's kind of talk about what all the kit comes with. And I've got the install manual here, and we'll take a look at that. So this is everything that comes with it, and it's broken down into all these components, like you see here on page 2 and page 3. Here it shows that the left front motor, the right rear motor. FYI, the front motors or assemblies, the motor sticks up in the air. The front motors, the motor sticks down. The rear motors or assemblies, the motors stick up. So these brackets that come with it, the motor protective plates as they call them, are to protect the motor that's sticking down in the front. And it's that way on both sides. Hope that makes sense. And also, as you can see on the picture here, it shows the motors where the arms are extended on all 4 of them. That's not the way they come in the box, and it doesn't tell you what to do. You can't manually open these things up and extend them themselves. What you have to do is hook your wiring harness up with the door sensors, with the valet switch, all of that stuff. Hook it all up, plug it all together, hook it up to a battery, and then you can cycle the valet switch, and then the motors will extend like this. Disconnect it from the battery, and then you'll be able to install them. You can't install them with the brackets drawn up. You have to have them extended like this in order to access all the bolts that go to them. So that's number 1. You'll need to do that first off. The shims, like I was talking about, it comes with 8 of them, and this is a really crude drawing, but this is what the shims look like. These are not washers that you use with the kit. These are shims that go in between the mounting bracket on the motors and the pinch weld. And that draws the running boards in closer to the pinch weld. Gives you a little bit tighter gap. Again, these are the motor protective plates. This is for the left side, for the right side. And it protects the electric motors that hang down underneath the vehicle. And you can see that here as I go down. You can see that motor protective plate right there. And the rear does not have that. So you do not want to install those at any time other than when you're completely finished with the install, because guess what? They're in the way. So don't put those on until the very last thing that you do. Now let's look at some other stuff here. So comes with these mounting plates, and these all follow the instructions pretty well. Washers. My kit came with 2 or 3 different bags of washers and bolts, like in separate packages. And for whatever reason, I don't know why they do that, but they do. But they'll all go together. They all fit the motors themselves. And it comes with some M8x35s and some M8x25s, socket head screws, and some bigger bolts here. These bigger bolts are for the motor protective plates, for these plates here. The smaller bolts are for the mounting the motor assemblies up to the pinch welds. The longer, smaller bolts, they're for the rear motor. It's because the rear motors use a spacer between the pinch weld and the motor. So they give you a longer bolt to accommodate that spacer that's placed in between the motor and the pinch weld. And then you have these tension blocks, which are for mounting these motor protective plates when you get to that point. They go up inside the channel of the frame, and then you have bolts that screw up into those. So it comes with some fuses, which the wiring harness already has fuses in it. These are just extras, so you won't do anything with that. And then, of course, it comes with the door sensors. That's part of the wiring harness. I'll show you where I mounted my door sensors, and the magnet that faces those door sensors. I'll show you where I mounted those too, because that was another question. Is it in the install videos of Rough Country puts out, he just sticks them on there, and he's done so many of them, I'm sure that he knows where he puts them every time and where they work. So that was kind of a trial and error type thing that we had to figure out. But the first shot, believe it or not, got it and they work. So that's a good thing. And it talks about your main wiring harness. And so that's one thing I wanted to tell you about for sure, is the main wiring harness controller. It bolts right in the center on the passenger side. And let me see if I can get a shot of that. See where is, okay. I don't know if you can see that, but that's the controller right there. The controller is where you want to start first. So install that controller right there in the middle using the bolts that are in the, or not the bolts, but the holes that are in the pinch weld. And that's where you begin to route your wiring at. So once you have that in place, go ahead and connect the wiring harness to the controller, and then you can start laying out the different leads of the wiring harness to the front motor on the passenger side, to the rear motor on the passenger side, and then you'll have one long run of a wiring harness that runs over to the driver's side along the framework underneath the Jeep, and then that splits off, goes to the front motor and to the rear motor. You also have another large wiring harness run that runs up to the battery of the Jeep, and then there's another shorter one. I should say the conduit is a shorter run. It has a lot of wire sticking out of it. That's the one that runs up through a body plug underneath the front passenger side floorboard, and that goes over to both the passenger side driver's doors and passenger door or rear door, and also over to the driver's side front and rear door, as well as the two leads that run to a valet switch. And I'll show you where I installed that too. Let's see, what else? So we talked about that. So wire routing. For me, the wire routing was pretty cut and dry. The wires that go to the front and rear motors, there's places up underneath the body that you can use tie wraps and tie wrap the excess up out of the way. But the key to it is definitely start at the controller and then work from there. Now, going across the bottom of the frame, I went behind the frame, the crossover part that's below the transmission and transfer case. I went on the back side of that as to stay away from the muffler and the exhaust pipe. They give you a stretch of silicone tubing that's installed over the wire harness, and you may have to slide that down and reposition that, which it slides fairly easy across that wire loom, and put that in a space, you know, where it's going to protect your wiring harness from the heat of the exhaust system. So be sure you do that. And then I just tie wrap that along that framework you know, as I did everything else. Now, when they start talking about accessing the inside interior panels to get to the to install the door sensors, I'll be honest with you, that was not an easy task per se, because I was afraid I was going to break things. But there's I think 4 panels that you have to remove in order to get to that. And if you look inside at the first one, this piece here runs from this point up along and into the passenger kick well. This all one piece, and it comes out as a one-piece unit. But in order to get to that, you have to pop this panel off where your door is attached, and you would release this little red clip. You push that up, and then you can throw the white handle up and pull that loose. It has to be all the way up in order to disconnect your door from this door harness. And then you want to pull this connector. Once this is disconnected, you want to pull this connector out and away, and it uses one of those plastic barb pins, for lack of a better word, but it takes some effort in order to get that separated from the hole that it's stuck into. Once you get that out of the way, then you can get to this little small 10mm nut here, take that off, and then you can pull this away from this stud. And then once you get that loose, you can start working the keepers loose. And all the keepers, the way you'll push these panels this way in order to release the keepers. And it sounds like it's going to break at times, but luckily it did not break. And then here at the where the emergency brake, not emergency brake, but the safety belt comes up through, you'll pull this little panel off here. There's another one back here. This panel here, this pops off that direction. You'll remove that. And then this lower panel here, again, it all goes this way. It pushes in towards the center of the car. And to release it, you can see how it separates a little bit as I pry it out. Pull that away, and then you can start working your sensor wires. Look, this is already popped out. Not a real good fit. I don't like that much. I have to work on that. But get all those panels out of the way, and then you can start running your wire for the door sensors. And now let me show you where the door sensors sit. So for the front doors, passenger side and driver, this is where I placed the door sensors. Look at this real close, and you'll notice how this makes a turn right there. I placed the edge of this sensor right at that turn and directly underneath it. And then I tucked the wire, like they showed, up against here and around and back in behind this trim cover. So this is a good place to put the front sensors. Now, the corresponding magnet for that is placed here. And if you look real close, there is a dimple right there. There's one there and one there. But that dimple right there, I placed it magnet directly in line with that dimple and about a 1/4 inch below it. So if you do the same, then this magnet should line up with the door sensor and it function properly. For the rear doors, they're not quite as easy to get to, and I hope this has enough light. Let me grab my phone here so we make sure that you can see this. All right, let's take a look here. All right, so here's the sensor on the rear door. And if you look, it's directly between these two bolts, and I lined up the back of the sensor here with the edge of that hinge. Hold on one second. Let me get a flashlight. There we go. That's a little bit better. All right, you can see the back of that sensor lines up with the edge of that hinge, and it's directly in the middle. So, and then I ran the wire around just like I did for the front. Now the corresponding magnet is right there. Now for this is hard to do with one hand. You can see how far this foam piece here, I placed it directly in line with that center raised portion of the foam right here. And then again, it's about 1/4 inch below the foam, which is directly in line with the opposing sensor there. And that did it same way on both sides, and it's working fine. So if it worked for me, it should work for you. That's the placement of the sensor. So that was another challenging task, shall we say. Let's see, what's next on the list I wanted to talk about? Ground location. All right, so each pair of door sensors for the driver's side and a pair for the passenger side have a ground wire. And the ground wire, again, once you take this cover off, there's a ground right in here in this area coming up through the body. You just run the screw up a little bit, slip the ground underneath it, kind of run the wire this direction, and then tighten it back up, and you'll get a good ground there. One other thing I was going to point out was where these wires come back in on these plastic panels. The plastic panels tip back underneath this ledge. So I clipped with a pair of dikes, I clipped the plastic, and then I bent the plastic back to take some of the strain off of where that would come in contact with the back side of this wire where it tucks around. That's not necessary, nobody recommended it, it's just, I think that's a good practice. As much strain as you can get off those wires, the better. Now for the harness that comes up through the floorboard, if you look down here, again, let me get my phone so I can see what we're looking at. See if you can actually see it or not. Anyway, all right. So if you look in the floorboard, sorry, grab the flashlight again. Like I said, I'm not a professional at this. All right, so here's the floorboard, and you can see that drain hole right there. There's a body plug directly below that, or at least underneath the carpet there is. And that's where you come up through. There's a rubber grommet in there, and I just took a hole punch, and I punched a hole through that rubber to run the conduit up through, and then the wiring for that, one side comes back along this side for your door sensors, and the rest of it, once you get all the carpet pulled back, matter of fact, these things here, these are just snaps to hold the carpet in place. You just pull and they release. Pull your carpet all the way back, and you'll run those wires right up this way across the hump, and then you'll repeat on the other side. You'll have to pull the carpet back over there, and then the wires just run across the floorboard over to the other side and up underneath the side trim pieces over there, just like you did on this side, and then to the wire to the door sensors on both of the doors for the driver's side. The valet switch, I was kind of torn as where to mount that. They show you mounting it to the lower left kick panel, or not kick panel, but the lower left part of the dash, and that's where I mounted mine. It's out of the way. I was kind of worried about kicking the thing when I got in and out, but that hasn't happened just yet. People, you can mount it anywhere you want to, but this is where I placed it. Hopefully you can see it. It's terrible. It's dark in here. Let me get the flashlight again. Let's see. So there is the valet switch, and it's just sticky back, which the sticky back didn't work too well, and I ended up, hang on one second. The sticky back didn't work too well, so I ended up replacing that with some good 3M tape, and which it had 3M tape on it to begin with, but didn't work. You notice it's in the on position. If you turn it to the off position, the running boards won't extend. They'll stay up regardless of the door position. So it's an easy way to turn that off if you're in some terrain you don't want, you know, the steps to extend down to. And let's talk about the lights. They give you a set of LED lights, 2 for each side. I placed those, I tried to place those as close as I could to the center of the doors. So this is where the rear ones are at. You can see these 2 mounting bolts, and I'm just behind that, and it runs up across the top of the motor and then on down through the wiring harness. So that's about midways on the door for the rear, and same thing for the front. So here's the 2 bolt holes in the center of the pinch weld. That's where the controller is mounted on the other side, on the passenger side. So it's just this far in front of that front bolt hole here, well, maybe 4 inches. And it lights up real well right where you're stepping out. They just stick on with some double-sided tape. So the rears has got this bevel to it, so it doesn't stick as well, as you can see. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. So the lights come on anytime the step opens or closes. Well, I should say anytime the step is down, the lights will come on. When you close the door, the step comes up, the lights shut off. And that leads me into, I think, almost the last thing I was going to tell you about. With a lot of steps, when you close the door, there's a delay to where you could open up the back door without the step closing up. You know, basically beat the delay. But with these, as soon as you close the door, I'm going to close the door, they come up. So there's no delay there. And I don't think that's adjustable. So keep that in mind too. And then finally, for the battery harness, or the battery wiring harness, I just ran that along the frame, tried to stay away from the hot exhaust as much as possible, and tie wrap the harness to some insulated lines on the passenger side of the engine compartment, and just followed it up and terminated that up here. I know it's terrible lighting, sorry about that, y'all. It came up this way right there. There's my positive and my negative both, and each one of those lines has got a fuse in it, and the fuses were in the fuse holders from the factory. That the 2 extra fuses, those are just extras. But don't hook it up, of course. Wait until you finished your install to hook that up, and to test your system. Make sure that it's working correctly. And with any luck, it will. It was quite a relief to close the doors and open them and see the steps come down. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. Oh, and the last thing, promise, the running boards themselves. So there's two little encased nut inserts, I guess you could call them, and they slide back and forth in a channel. Oh, that leads me to something else. Don't tighten down any of the bolts that hold the motors on completely. Matter of fact, I would leave them sloppy loose until you try the running boards on the brackets. Once you have the running boards bolted to the brackets and everything looks good, then you can tighten up all the motor mounting bolts. There's 3 on each motor that hold it to the frame or hold it to the body. But save those for last. The very last thing is the motor mount or motor protective brackets for the front motors. I mentioned that early on, but that's what you'll want to install very last, because by then you'll have your wiring harness tied up out of the way, the pigtails coming off of the motors themselves. I routed those directly up and tie wrapped them again to the motor so the connectors come in on top and are out of the way of the moving mechanisms, just so they don't get pinched. But none of that would have been possible if I had installed those motor protective brackets first off. Matter of fact, I did, and I had to remove them in order to get all that stuff tied up. And oh, one other thing is, when you are trying to mount your motor protective bracket on the driver's side, our Jeep has a 3.6 in it, and I don't know if it's common or not to the other models, but there are insulated lines that run down the framework. And for these brackets to mount, the motor protective brackets, there are blind nuts on the end of a metal stick that you feed through a hole in the chassis frame, and then you run the bolt in the other side, and that is not an easy task to get lined up properly, because on the driver's side those insulated lines run right along where that hole is at, that you have to feed that bolt through, or that nut through, in order to get the bolt started on the back side of it for that bracket. But what I ended up doing was I used a pair of needle nose pliers, needle nose vice grips, and clamped that to the end of the little stick that sticks out. Actually, I'll show you a picture of what I'm talking about here. I think they have it in here, and you'll see it on your instructions probably. Where is it? Okay, yeah. These M12 hex nuts ×2, you can see that they got this metal rod welded to the nut. And this is so that you can grab a hold of the rod, feed this nut through that hole in the frame, and then hold it up against the hole in the frame that the opposing bolt is going to come into. But with those insulated lines on that driver's side, you can't get in there far enough to make the nut rest up against the side of the frame so you can catch it with the bolt. That's what the needle nose vice grips were for, is to give me more reach so I could do that. It took a little effort, but I did get it. And let's see, what else did I want to tell y'all about? Ground location sensor placements, miscellaneous. I guess that's it. Anyway, so if I think of something else, I'll add to the video, but for now, I think that covers all the little install tips that I wanted to pass on, and I hope that it all goes well for you, and just set aside plenty of time to finish the job. I almost started this real late at night one night, thinking I could knock it out in 2 or 3 hours, and I'm so glad I didn't. Waited till the following day. But once they're done, they look good. That's what they look like when they're down. They're a thick running board, and you can see that. But that gives you the illusion of that rock slider when it's tucked up which is what I was looking for. Anyway, wish everybody luck, and y'all enjoy your new running boards once you get them installed. All right, y'all take care. So, yep, I thought about one other thing. Yeah, I mentioned those shims early on in that video, and before you tighten up all your motor mounting bolts, you know, once you've got the running boards installed in place, you've got them adjusted, you know, forwards and rearwards, you got them all centered up real nice, then you would want to come back and tighten all them bolts up, all your motor mounting bolts, firmly, and that would finish you off. But if you want to tuck your running boards in closer to the pinch welds, you would need to back off those motor mounting bolts, all three of them. Like, there's two that go in from the pinch weld and one that comes up from the bottom of the bracket into the bottom of the body. You'd want to loosen all of those up, and then you'd place two of those shims behind, or like for the rear motors, you'd place those between the mount, that spacer that comes with the kit, and the pinch weld, and then you'd also place two more between the front motor mounts and the pinch weld, and that'll buy you about a 1/4 inch both on the front and the rear, pulling the running boards in closer to the pinch weld. Now, of course, you could do just the front, or you can do just the rear. It just depends on how it turns out, where you need those shims at. But so look at that before you finish your install, and before you install those front motor protective brackets, because guess what, they would be in the way of the body mounting bolt for the motors. So be sure and look at that gap, make sure it's where you want it. It only comes with 8 of those shims, so you're only going to be able to shim that 1/4 inch on each side if you install shims on both front and rear motors on one side. And then one side may not need shims. It just depends. But yeah, you can close that gap up just a little bit with the included shims. And the bolts the motors onto the pinch weld with, they're long enough to accommodate one set of shims on each motor. But save that until the very end and see where you sit before you finally tighten it all up and put those protective brackets on the front motors. Okay, I think that's it now. Again, good luck with you installing these things, and hope y'all's go smoother than mine did.